All right, so are you ready? We're going deep into Camp Crystal Lake for this deep dive, exploring the entire Friday the 13th franchise across all 12 movies. We're
Wow.
going to uncover how this iconic series and Jason Voorhees himself, how he's changed over the years. Buckle up.
It's more than just a bloodbath, though.
Right.
We'll see how Friday the 13th actually reflects deeper anxieties and cultural trends
That-
evolving right alongside like our fears.
That's what makes it so interesting. Like, take the original Friday the 13th from 1980. Everyone thinks it's Jason
Yeah.
behind the killing. But no, that final reveal,
Oh, yeah.
it's his mother, Pamela Voorhees, seeking revenge. Did that twist blow your mind when you first saw it?
Oh, absolutely. It definitely set the stage for a series full of surprises, but it also introduced like a key element that would stick around, right?
Yeah.
Camp Crystal Lake is this place of violence and tragedy,
Yeah.
this cursed camp that adds to the atmosphere.
Yeah, and that setting plays into the whole slasher genre, which, for anyone who's not a horror buff, basically means a group of people, usually teens,
Right.
getting picked off one by a mysterious killer.
Oh, yeah.
Friday the 13th really helped cement those tropes.
Exactly. And that cursed camp setting adds to the feeling of isolation and dread.
Right.
But getting back to Pamela, her motive was revenge for Jason's drowning, right?
Right.
That immediately sets up Jason as a sympathetic figure.
In a twisted way.
Yeah.
He's almost a tragic figure,
Yeah.
fueled by his mother's death.
Uh-huh.
But then in Friday the 13th Part 2, he takes center stage.
Yeah.
And his look is, well, let's just say he hadn't found the hockey mask yet.
Yeah.
Picture him with a burlap sack over his head.
Yeah.
Not quite as iconic. Right?
Yeah, it's interesting, though, because in part 2, we meet Ginny, a survivor who doesn't just run and scream. She tries to understand Jason, sees him as this wounded child seeking vengeance. Do you think there's a part of us that's meant to sympathize with him?
Ooh.
Even a little, despite the brutality?
That's a great question. It's like, are we supposed to feel bad for him or just terrified?
Right.
And then, boom, Friday the 13th, Part 3 comes along in 1982, and that's when he gets the iconic hockey mask. Plus, it was filmed in 3D.
Oh, wow.
It was a total game changer. You could practically feel yourself getting splashed with,
Yeah, more than just the blood, that hockey mask transformed Jason into this instant symbol of horror.
Oh, yeah.
Think about how recognizable that is.
Totally. And they tried to wrap things up with Friday the 13th, the final chapter in 84.
Yeah.
Introducing Tommy Jarvis, who's like this scrappy kid who manages to outsmart Jason and seemingly kill him off.
Right.
But come on, we all know how these franchises work, right?
The final chapter was a classic climax to the slasher formula, killer seemingly defeated. But we've learned that in horror, very few things are truly final. So how did they bring him back?
Well, they took a swing with Friday the 13th, a new beginning in 85, but instead of Jason, they had a copycat killer. They focused more on Tommy Jarvis and the psychological trauma he carried. But an interesting choice.
A New Beginning is definitely a debated entry in the franchise. Some fans saw it as a fresh take, exploring the idea of the slasher copycat, which was becoming popular in other horror movies. Others felt it strayed too far from what they loved. Did you find it worked?
I can see both sides.
Yeah.
But then they brought the real deal back in Friday the 13th, Part 6. Jason lives, and let me tell you, this is where things take a wild turn. Jason gets resurrected by a bolt of lightning. Talk about dramatic entrances.
And that's not just a cool visual. It marks a huge shift in the franchise.
Yeah.
Jason goes from a vengeful human to this supernatural killing machine like zombie. And this was the 80s, a time when the whole zombie craze was starting to take hold.
So it's tapping into a larger cultural fear, right?
Yeah.
That Jason becomes this embodiment of something unstoppable, almost like a force of nature.
Precisely. And this unstoppable force is unleashed even further in Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. They introduced Tina, a teenage girl with telekinetic powers. So now it's Carrie meets Jason Voorhees. What were they thinking?
Honestly, it's so over the top, but I kind of love it.
Yeah.
The franchise wasn't afraid to get weird.
Yeah.
Then there's Friday the 13th, Part 8. Jason takes Manhattan, where, spoiler alert, he spends a lot of time on a boat.
A lot of time.
But hey, they eventually get him to New York City for some urban mayhem.
Yeah, Jason Takes Manhattan is a fun one, even if it isn't considered the best. It showed they were willing to experiment with different settings and tones. It was a chance to see Jason outside of his usual stomping grounds, but they didn't stop there.
Oh, no, they didn't. This is where they really shake things up. Next, we're getting into Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, and it's a whole new ball game. This is body-hopping demonic possession, Jason. What did you make of that shift?
Jason Goes to Hell was a bold move. It almost feels like a different franchise. They took Jason in a supernatural direction, but with this demonic twist. It was like they were trying to reinvent him for the 90s.
Totally. And it sets up that epic clash with Freddy Krueger from Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, that little tease at the end. Fans went wild for that. But before we get to that showdown, there's one more stop. Jason X from 2001, Space, The Final Frontier, for Jason Voorhees.
Jason X is something else. They cryogenically freeze him, and he wakes up on a spaceship centuries later. They give him a super-powered upgrade. It's peak sci-fi horror, and I'm not sure anyone knew what to make of it.
I think it's so bad, it's good. Uber Jason, as they call him, is just ridiculous. And the whole space setting feels so out there. But then finally, in 2003, we got the movie everyone had been waiting for, Freddy vs. Jason. It's like the ultimate horror showdown. Does it live up to the hype for you?
Absolutely. They took two iconic horror figures and threw them into this brilliantly chaotic battle. It was violent, it was funny, and it had some truly memorable moments. It's a must-see for any horror fan.
I couldn't agree more. And then we come full circle with the 2009 reboot of Friday the 13th. They went back to the basics, combining elements from the earlier films. But this Jason, he's brutal. He's got traps, secret tunnels. This is a Jason who's honed his craft.
The reboot is interesting because it attempts to update Jason for a new audience, while keeping the core elements that made him scary. It's like, how do you make Jason terrifying for a generation that's grown up on more extreme horror?
And it works. He's still terrifying. Even though we know what to expect, it's like no matter how many times you see him, that hockey mask and the machete never get old.
It's like he taps into something primal, a fear that's hardwired into us. We're fascinated by the unstoppable, the relentless, the idea of something that can't be killed. And Jason embodies all of that.
So looking back at this whole journey, from grieving mother to burlap sack to hockey mask zombie and beyond, what do you think is the biggest takeaway from the Friday the 13th franchise? What should our listener really take away from this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Friday the 13th is much more than just a series of slasher films. It's a reflection of our cultural anxieties, our evolving fears, and our fascination with the macabre.
I'm with you there. We've seen Jason evolve from a tragic figure into this pop culture icon. And along the way, the franchise has reflected changing trends in horror and our own changing fears.
And remember how we talked about the slasher genre in general? Friday the 13th was so influential. Think about how many horror movies have come out since, using those same tropes. The isolated location, the group of teens, the killer who just won't die.
Right. They practically wrote the rule book. But there's something about Jason that goes beyond just being a slasher villain. He's become this larger-than-life figure, appearing on merchandise, inspiring costumes, even referenced in other media. Why do you think he's had such staying power?
There's something about his simplicity, his relentlessness, that makes him both terrifying and strangely compelling. He's like a force of nature, and there's a certain awe that comes with that, even if it's mixed with terror.
He's the ultimate underdog in a way. No matter how many times they try to kill him off, he keeps coming back. There's something almost admirable about his persistence. Yeah, in a homicidal kind of way.
It's like he represents this primal fear of the unkillable, the unstoppable, and that taps into something deep within us. We can't help but be fascinated, even as we're repulsed.
Totally. We're drawn to the dark mint, to the things that scare us, and Friday the 13th delivers that in spades. But it's also fun. It's entertaining. We can scream. We can laugh. We can cover our eyes. But ultimately, we're safe.
It's that safe thrill that keeps people coming back to horror movies. We can experience those intense emotions, the adrenaline rush, without any real danger. And Friday the 13th has mastered that formula.
So we've gone from a grieving mother to a burlap sack-wearing killer to a hockey-masked zombie to a space cyborg. What a ride. What do you think is the most frightening version of Jason? What do you think our listener might find the scariest?
That's a tough one. Each version reflects like different fears. The early Jason, driven by grief, taps into a fear of the unknown, the danger lurking in the shadows. Then as he becomes the supernatural force, it's more about our helplessness against something unstoppable.
And then Uber Jason. That's pure sci-fi horror. Like what happens when technology goes wrong? When we create something we can't control. I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially today.
Absolutely. Technology is a powerful tool, but it can be used for both good and evil.
Right.
And Jason, in his many forms, is a reminder of that.
Right.
But whether it's human, supernatural, or futuristic, there's a reason he's terrified audiences for decades.
Yeah.
He's relentless.
He just doesn't quit. And that's part of the fun, right? We know he's going to come back no matter what. It's like a horror movie guarantee.
Yeah.
But it makes you think.
Hmm.
Why are we so drawn to these scary stories, these unkillable monsters?
It's like we need that release, that safe space to confront our fears, even if it's just through a screen. Horror movies let us experience those intense emotions,
Yeah.
the adrenaline, the suspense. But in a controlled environment, we
Well,
know it's not real, but it feels real in the moment.
and Friday the 13th takes us right to that edge.
Hmm.
It's gory, it's suspenseful, and it's got that iconic killer we all love to hate. But it's also thought-provoking, isn't it? It makes you think about the nature of fear, about why we find these things so fascinating.
Exactly. We've explored the evolution of Jason, the impact of the franchise on the horror genre, and even how it reflects our own cultural anxieties. It's amazing how much depth there is to a series that, on the surface, seems like just another slasher flick.
So after this deep dive, have you figured out which version of Jason scares you the most?
For me, it's the original, human Jason. There's something chilling about a killer driven by such raw human emotions, but who knows? Maybe he's lurking out there somewhere, just waiting for his next victim.
Okay, now you're just trying to freak me out. But hey, that's what makes this franchise so great. It stays with you long after the credits roll. So thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of Camp Crystal Lake. We've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to discover.
It's been a fascinating exploration. And for our listener, if you're ever feeling brave, maybe revisit the franchise and see which Jason gives you the biggest chills. You might be surprised by what scares you now versus what scared you then.
And hey, if you have your own stack of sources you want us to unpack, we're ready for the next deep dive. Until then, sweet dreams. And don't forget to double-check those closets.